Gentlemen of the craft, what's good? Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of Gameology. I'm your host, Neo K. Marcellus. Now, that's checkmate. As the title and thumbnail of this show implies, and makes a reference to a social and a undisputable fact. And that is, when one plays the game and plays the game properly, then currency, this cheddar, is used to leverage women and everything else within a social dynamic to their benefit and to their advantage. Well, kinda. Let me provide some clarity to what I just stated, because a well-skilled chess player, a practitioner of gameology who knows how to properly play the game, knows a man with clarity reaches his intended outcome and goal sooner than a man with confidence and a heavy dose of self-assurance ever does. And what needs to be wiped clean of any ambiguity and confusion is what is meant by the term game from a street perspective. And on the strength of all the OGs that taught me the game, this prompts a need in order for me to make a crucial and a decisive distinction between how the term has been co-opted and mangled by the pickup artists and the dating coaching community versus how the term game was intended in order to be implemented from an authentic street perspective where it originally originated from. Because the term game from an authentic street perspective has little to do with any pickup artist or dating coaching type of corniness. So, from an authentic street perspective, the term game is used as a conceptual noun versus a concrete noun. So you got to excuse me first for going all Poindexter on you and whatnot, but clarity in this issue is a must. Therefore, a conceptual noun is by definition a component of the 8 parts of speech that names a quality, a characteristic, or a mode of thought that cannot be detected by one's senses or perceiving capabilities, versus a concrete noun like a person, place, or thing. So for the reasons of clarity and for disclosure, let me use a primary source, which is a receipt that provides a direct and first-hand account of an experience or the event. So you can have an unshakable position in order to plant your evaluating and fact-checking skills to hash out a proper and a empirical understanding of this elusive term, which is referred to as the concept of game. Also, that head scratching of a revelation that I stated at the beginning of this video, where I emphasized that when one plays the game and plays the game properly, then currency, that cheddar, is used to leverage women and everything else within a social and personal dynamic. That statement will be clearly explained here in a moment. As well, make sure you hit that like and subscribe and share button. Like I said many times before, it would definitely do me a solid. But back to this primary source and receipt that will provide you a thorough definition of this elusive term from a street perspective of this concept called game. But back in the late 1960s and early 70s, a research team out of the University of Berkeley in California was granted access to go inside some of the stomping grounds and hoods in the Bay Area, and they interviewed several well-known and renowned practitioners of that time of this philosophy referred to as the concept of game. And the accounts of what was talked about and discovered was put into a publication, and the results of that was a book describing exactly how this game is truly played. And the distribution rights to this book was acquired by our brother Tariq Nasheed, and the name of the book is Black Players. So go to Amazon and make sure you add that to your collection. But in this particular book that I'm speaking of, in chapter 7, it touches and stabs at the very heart of what truly entails, from a street perspective, what game truly means. And that is this concept, which is referred to in chapter 7 of this book as the triangle of exchange. So peep out this image I'm currently showing you now. Behind every social dynamic and situation is these three components that is indicated on this image at the top and the two positions at the lower corners of this triangle, which is the components of the facilitator, function, and structure. When these three components are able to be pinpointed within any social dynamic, regardless if the relationship is casual, business oriented, or political, it gives the observer, the gameologist, a Jedi type insight into the situation that they can utilize to their advantage. This Trinity or Triad configuration, you have laid your eyes on it many times before. Between the two polar opposites brought into compatibility by a third, which is in this case the facilitator, that furnishes the avenue which reality is then able to be put into a position in order to manifest and be brought into view. As this image is now identifying, you rub up against and continue with these principles on an everyday and even sometimes a minute by minute basis. Whereas, for instance, regardless if you fall into either side of this first example on this image, which is the polar opposites, which is either you fall within being a buyer or a seller, the facilitator that makes these two factors compatible is currency or moolah, which produces the reality that you and I consistently engages in, referred to as commerce. Other realities are also created by this 3-point configuration, as shown by these two examples on this same image, which shows you the pervasiveness and practicality of this concept referred to as the triangle of exchange. Also, another piece of this puzzle which demands attention surrounding this concept of game is what's behind every social dynamic, which is the individuals who give forward momentum to those very situations. And it doesn't matter whether it's a casual social or business social dynamic, a social political dynamic, or even a romantic social dynamic between a man and a woman. But peep this out. These three qualities on this image has many manifestations and several flavors that provides tremendous insight into the different aspects of reality that you and I are consistently contending with on a 24/7 basis. So for the individuals who resides behind every social dynamic, three particular qualities stands out the most. And this speaks to the human element behind all social dynamics. And these three crucial human elements that sits behind every social dynamic is first is the individual's preference, second, their abilities, and third, their opportunities. However, these three essential human elements that I just got through mentioning, which is one's preference, one's abilities, and one's opportunities, cannot, and I repeat, cannot inhabit the same space and the same time period simultaneously. And this is the reason why there's so much strife and conflict within the social dynamic. And please don't go full game goofy commando on me and equate conflict upon the chessboard of life with some original sin or some other religious bullshit. As I said many times before on several Chronicles of Gameology podcasts, the three cycles that is consistently contended with upon the chessboard of life are the cycles of competition, conflict, and collaboration. But let me zero in on these three essential human elements that I just got through mentioning, especially dealing with one's preferences as it relates to the male and female relationship dynamic. Men and women sit and reside on the polar opposite to one another when it comes to their preferences. So, peep game. Check out this new image that I'm currently showing you now. As this pertains to the female and male relationship dynamic, a man wants a woman to need him. Check out the different color coding on the principles dealing with the concept of wants and needs. I will explain this here momentarily. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, a woman needs a man to want her. And once again, check out the different color codings on the principles of the concept of wants and needs. So, for clarification, a man's preference leans heavily towards his wants, which is the reason why it is color-coded within red, symbolizing and associating with the polar opposite of function. Going back to that image displaying the triangle of exchange. And for a woman, her preferences leans heavily towards her needs, which is why it is color-coded within blue, symbolizing and associating with the polar opposite of this triangle, dealing with the concept of structure, on this same image displaying the triangle of exchange. You see, women like men who want them, but don't need them. A woman is turned off by a needy man and is turned on by a man who doesn't need her, yet wants her. As for a man, we like women who needs us, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, that don't want us. As for instance, when a man looks at a woman, she is inclined to look away. The woman needs, craves, and appreciates the attention, but will go out of her way on acknowledging the meaning that she wants it. The attention, that is, because a man's wants, his main and highest preferences, has many dimensions to it. This goes for the woman as well. Her main and highest preferences is her needs, and it has several categories and varieties to it as well. So, if these two elements are misconstrued, misunderstood, and discombobulated on a fundamental level, the results is emotional anxiety and dysfunctionality for both the man and the woman. The man has the power to offer and initiate, and the woman has the power to refuse and dismiss. The woman gets bent out of shape when the man doesn't offer, and the man, by the same token, gets bent out of shape when the woman refuses. This topsy-turvy, push and shove, rock'em sock'em melee that takes place between a man and a woman, it's because neither one has any true insight into their preferences and how they truly works. In other words, they are oblivious to how the game of life and the game itself is truly played. As you can see, game from an authentic street perspective is all about attaining absolute knowledge and understanding, and not this corny, cliche, contrived pickup techniques and dating advice. Game deals with understanding the precursors and the fabric that give all scenarios and reality their texture. And then this information can be utilized to one's own advantage and benefits. Now, this leads us to the topic of how currency, that cheddar, plays its part on leveraging situations and the social dynamic to one's benefit and to their best interest, which is accomplished by thoroughly understanding this concept of the triangle of exchange. Therefore, when a man understands and comprehends how the game is actually played from a street perspective, that is, he becomes in effect intriguing. Check out this new image I'm currently showing you now. Then once he becomes intriguing, the next stage, he has the power of introduction. This is a man's game plan, his program. This leads to the next stage of him being extremely interesting, the practitioner of gameology, that is. And finally, to this last stage and its impact upon the individual or individuals that the man is containing with, regardless if it's a business partner that the man is getting involved with on a financial endeavor or a casual relationship with a female. This last stage is when the individual or individuals that the man is dealing with becomes wholeheartedly and sincerely impressed. This is that currency, that cheddar I was truly speaking of at the beginning of this episode, which I promise to bring further clarity to. This is a man's social currency, his social monetary value that he brings to the social dynamic table, and its associated contingencies in all of its glory. This social currency, this cheddar, is a particular form of precious commodity that people seek out in social environments and interactions. Because on the chessboard of life, and what I'm about to say shouldn't really be any surprise to you, but people seek relationships that add value to their lives and advance their own interests, and basically seek out individuals that will make them better off. in the long run. Also, a very important caveat to this social currency, this precious commodity that provides a practitioner influential power within a social dynamic. This social currency, from a general point of view, is situational and context dependent and sensitive, meaning that how a person value your skills and what you bring to the table is highly dependent on the situation, the person, and the exact need highlighted within the confinements of that situation. And therefore, for the practitioners of gameology, this is one of the reasons why the craft requires the practitioner to develop a thorough and concise mouthpiece, which is the ability to persuade. So to have a concise, thorough, and functional mouthpiece, it requires two indispensable and obligatory kinds of components. Number one of these two components is pinpointing an objective reference within that circumstance you are contending with, which the triangle of exchange gives a practicing practitioner plenty of data and facts so one can be thoroughly up to speed on that circumstance they are contending with. And the second component is the bridge that connects the participants within that conversation. And this requires a gameologist sometimes to switch from being an introvert to an extrovert if need be, and acquire a conversational kind of personality. Because switching from an introvert to an extrovert is a matter of understanding the concept of one's social battery, which is how one recharges their internal social bank account from engaging within the push and pull upon the chessboard of life and the social dynamic. An extrovert recharges their internal social bank account by being around other people. They feed off the energy of others, whereas an introvert is the polar opposite. They recharge their battery by being alone. Being around others depletes their social battery, requiring them to seek out solitude and someplace quiet so they can gather their thoughts. Once more, like I have stated on several other Chronicles of Gameology podcasts, this concept of game is a multifaceted psychology. One of its objectives is to give the practitioner a mind over circumstance type of ability that serves the practitioner in every facet of their lives. Case in point, and one of the prime examples of how this triangle of exchange, this authentic way of playing the game, can take an individual to the greatest heights of stardom and success, is showcased and revealed in a book by one of the realest OGs who ever done it. And this is the book called Split Decision by Ice-T. Make sure you go and add that to your collection, because this book, it can act as another receipt or primary source. And it gives insight into this authentic way of playing the game. What game equips a practitioner with is the know-how on understanding that life doesn't always happen by a logical consistency, because most times than not, the social dynamic, the chessboard of life that you're consistently contending with, it operates instead on conflict, competition, and contradiction. And this requires something other than having a logical consistency mindset on understanding how things maneuver. It requires a higher level of reasoning and insight into ratios and proportionalities. And I'm definitely going to do more content breaking down this concept of this triangle of exchange. But every time I produce a video, you're getting introduced to its content anyway, because the foundation of the philosophy of gameology is based upon this understanding of this triangle of exchange. In conclusion, knowing how to play the game from an authentic street perspective, it provides the emerging chess player and gameologist a sizable insight and a discernment on what they are, who they are, and greater clarity about where they're being, and added confirmation on exactly where they are heading. Now, that's checkmate. Thanks for watching. We'll definitely catch you on the next episode.